you can get a fine, and you can get a fine because everybody was late to the press conference. This is the Arsenal News Show. Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk, back again with you guys and girls for another episode of what is the Arsenal News Show, joining you nearly every single morning at 8 a.m. UK time. Thank you as always for joining me and making this a part of your morning routines. It is incredibly appreciated. A massive apology for yesterday's show. It was all set up, it was all ready to go, and then there was a family emergency that I thought was going to be when it first begun. I thought it was going to be pretty swift resolution. It wasn't, and therefore I had to spontaneously cancel the show despite it being all set up and you all very much being patiently waiting and sitting there ready for the show to start. So I can only profusely apologize. Something out of my control that I wasn't able to go through with the show as a result of. So thank you for your understanding. Thank you for your kind comments. Thank you for your consciousness and your awareness and your thoughtfulness. It is very much appreciated. So thank you. Let's talk less about that and more about Arsenal. Good morning to those joining us in the chat box. Really appreciate all of your time. Thank you so much for being here. Martin, Barry T, Temi, Matt G, Ben, John, Paul, other Paul. We've got Arasilki. We've got Olawale. We've got Maximius, Jose, Glenn, Carlton, Gooner76. Rich, Tom, Trevor, thank you to you all and plenty more for being here. Thank you for those listening on catch up as well. You can listen to these shows in audio versions as well. Thank you to everybody for tuning in. It is hugely appreciated. But without further ado, let's jump into today's and yesterday's stories, shall we? We begin at the beginning. With David Ornstein talking a couple of days ago about Alexander Isak. I want to discuss this story in a little bit more detail, speaking regarding the Newcastle striker and broadly across Arsenal's transfers, kind of in terms of their expectation, in terms of kind of where Arsenal are at in a number of different aspects, from the specific transfers themselves to more specifically the players that ultimately could be signed by a sporting director, which is obviously very interesting as well. On top of that, but on Isak, he suggests that there seems to circulate in the industry a feeling that Newcastle would want £150 million for Alexander Isak in the summer, regardless of whether they were in the Champions League or not. That's the price tag. That is what it would take for a club to get Alexander Isak out of his club, which I think we can all agree he is not worth. And you might turn around and say, well, he's probably the best striker in the Premier League this season, and I wouldn't have too much debate about that. But the reason why he's not worth £150 million, is because the injury record that he has seemingly got over and this season has not really suffered with too much, although he has had a few incidents, is if you were to invest £150 million, it's not just this in isolation. Ultimately, it is a huge, potentially nearly all of Arsenal's summer budget on one player who, were they to get injured, effectively means that Arsenal haven't improved the squad at all, or at least very, very minimally with who is remaining, who has been brought in that summer transfer window. So, unfortunately, I think we have to be very grounded and objective about this. We cannot pay this amount of money for Alexander Isak. Now, if indeed this changes and it gets closer to, say, £100 million, that might be different. If, say, you can do a Declan Rice level deal for Alexander Isak, then yes, there's definitely a conversation to be had there and a negotiation to be had. But £150 million is just silly money for a player who could get injured and has a history of injuries and could be missing and would take up the bulk of Arsenal's budget for the summer. It's just not worth it. It's just not. And I'll tell Ornstein, suggests that Benjamin Sesko remains the player that Arsenal are kind of heaviest on. He says Arsenal will have done significant work on many options at striker. To my knowledge, none more so than Sesko. That doesn't mean they're guaranteed to sign him. As you mentioned, there is the Isak interest, and also they are not the only club pursuing Sesko. Personally, I haven't heard of Ekitike or any other candidates being as high in the thinking as those two at this stage, but that can always change, and it can always change. People kind of think about, what a journalist or a reporter has said a month ago, a week ago, and think, well, if it's not what they're saying a week ago, they must be badly sourcing information. And the reality is that transfers happen so quickly, information comes out in such a delayed fashion, and it kind of seeps out, leaks out at times at different moments, that things can change so dramatically in the public eye from what's going on in reality. So, of course, things can be different, and Arsenal may indeed move for a player that is not either of Sesko or Isak in the summer. But at this moment in time, and for what has felt like quite a long period of time, Benjamin Sesko continues to stand out as the most obvious candidate that Arsenal seemingly will look to pursue. Their interest is long, it's well documented, it's well known. Sesko is known to be someone who would be open to the idea of moving to Arsenal. Yes, he stayed last summer, but there was a lot of other factors involved during that period of time that prevented a move. And to my knowledge, there is a gentleman's agreement with Leipzig that if a club comes in with a bid of over 70 million euros, which is about 62 million pounds, then there would be a deal to do, which could be less than half of what you would pay for Alexander Isak, for a player who is significantly younger, still playing in a very good league, having a very, very good season in terms of his finishing. But there is always risk. There's risks with any transfer, of course. But players like Victor Gyökeres, his name has not really emerged at all. I'm not talking about like our own chats and conversations, but from an Arsenal point of view, his name has not been one that I've heard talked about too much. Hugo Ekitike has more recently been talked about in Germany as being linked with a move to Arsenal, but over here in England, not really. And beyond that, there aren't really too many others that Arsenal are being linked with or are known to be following. They will be certainly following plenty, but Sesko is the most likely candidate at this point in time for that. Also, there is, according to David, no final decision yet made. He says Arsenal are working to bring in a director of football to a conclusion as swiftly as possible, but it's hard for them, let alone us as the media, to put a precise timeline on that before there are multiple factors, moving parts and circumstances like fixtures, which of course have an impact. They've been narrowing down the options, and as been widely reported, Andrea Berta is among them. But there are other candidates, and a final decision that has yet to be made, with conversations and due diligence ongoing. Arsenal's priority will be to make the right appointment for them rather than a quick one. But if they can marry up both aspects, that would be the ideal scenario. This is a huge moment for the club on so many levels. It's a massive decision. And that last part of what he says is so key, because Arsenal, as long as Arsenal get this done before the summer, before the end of May, but Arteta, I keep saying Arteta, Ornstein explains that there is a feeling that this will be done in March, which is obviously great. But we want this done before the end of the season, of course, so that the integration can happen, the familiarity can happen, and plans can happen before the summer. But I would much rather get the right person in May than the wrong person in March. And Arsenal would as well. And it's so important that Arsenal get the right version. I've had a few conversations with contemporaries of mine, colleagues of mine about the options. And there's a real split of views. I've spoken to a few people who really don't think Andrea Berta is the right option for Arsenal, that his profile does not fit in the current kind of setup, and that could cause some conflict, and that it may not be kind of a seamless scenario. People say that they want someone to come in and challenge Arteta, and I certainly want someone who's got, an influence that they could certainly challenge Arteta. But there's a balance. You don't want somebody to come in that is going to be at odds with the manager on their vision, on how they see a squad and how they see the squad changing. You don't want somebody who's going to be at odds with the coach, because that would create problems. That won't create positivity. So you need somebody that, yes, can challenge and could make kind of push the thinking of the coach, but you don't want to bring in someone that's at odds with the vision, the project, what the manager wants, because that will create issues. That will not get you the players that are ultimately going to mesh together. Equally, you don't want somebody who is and has a reputation that has been built over a short period of time that has already failed. And that's where, for me, I look scathingly so on somebody like Jason Ato, because January was a massive, massive failure. And it overshadows some of the successes that he's had previously with Edu, and more recently, of course, with some of the summer planning, like the Martin Zubimendi situation. And it overshadows that, and it should overshadow that. And then you've got someone like Roberto Alabe, of course, who has been very inaccurate and mixed reporting. The only accurate thing is that he is someone that Arsenal have considered as a potential option to replace Edu. That is the most accurate thing you can know about that situation. Don't buy into the noise and the chaos around that right now. But he's someone that would fit, I think, quite seamlessly, into the Arsenal fold, work well with Arteta, kind of aligns on a lot of the visions. And then you've got someone like Dan Ashworth, of course, who's got a lot of experience here in England with a lot of Premier League clubs, both good and bad. Good experiences, Brighton, to an early degree Newcastle, but to a latter degree of Newcastle, and then a Man United gig, not a good time, and some questionable decisions. So this is what I mean. It's not an easy choice. It's not a simple decision to make, and it is a humongous choice that Arsenal have. It is a massive, massive, massive decision for Arsenal to make. It is a decision that could outlast Arteta in terms of an appointment. It could be a decision that costs Arsenal or gets Arsenal trophies. And that's why it is such an important period to have the right man or woman in charge of this position. So that's where we're kind of at with the sporting director as well. Now, Mikel Arteta conducted his press conference yesterday at the Emirates Stadium, which was a weird thing. Oh, there was something going on at the Emirates that Arteta needed to attend, so they combined the two and had them. I have to say, now, when you go to London Colney, some of my colleagues, not colleagues, but some people I obviously work with, are very kind enough to bring lunch for us at times when we're at press conferences, and I'm very grateful for that. But the food yesterday was so good. We had salt beef sandwiches, which was just sublime. Like, so I was never going to talk about this, but it's my favorite sandwich. Salt beef, sauerkraut, bit of a few slices of gherkins. Oh, gorgeous. Because an event was on, obviously, I think that we benefited from the fact there was an event on at the Emirates. So that was great. But what it meant was, it was quite chill. Press conference was meant to start at 1. I usually go in a few minutes before 1, or when Arteta turns up early, you have the time to kind of walk in. But usually through the press lounge area of London Colney, Arteta walks through it. So he's arriving, so you just walk in when he walks in. At the Emirates, he comes through the doorway opposite the doorway that the journalists are supposed to go into. So if you're sitting in the press lounge and Arteta walks in, you have no idea unless someone tells you. Now, it was 5-1. I walked through the doors into the press lounge. As I'm walking through the doors, Arteta is literally coming through the opposite door the other way. So I'm panicking, running into my seat, getting the blog up, getting ready to post. I know that there's other journalists still sitting in the press lounge. So I quickly drop a WhatsApp to Simon Colleagues, like, he's here, you need to get in here now. And then as they try to come through the doors, the security guards outside the doors don't let them in because, well, the press conference has started by this point. You can't let people through the doors when the press has started. So they have to go around the back. And if you watch the press conference, and you can watch it, of course, on the Arsenal website or on the Haters YouTube channel, or if you want to read the transcripts, because I include it in the transcript on the Every Word of the Football.London website, you will see Arteta go, that's a fine. And it was a good, funny moment. He was in a good mood. It's some really good stuff in the embargo section as well. That I recommend you go and check out when it drops also. So yeah, it's worth the watch just for kind of a little funny moment. Those little gems are quite good. You know, it builds rapport. It makes Arteta feel a lot warmer than sometimes he comes across. So I thought it was quite a good moment to discuss. But overall, the press conference was good. There were some key themes, of course, from the press conference. Wasn't really anything in the way of team news. There wasn't really anything. I mean, there's no understanding of any injuries from the PSV game. There's no understanding that Martinelli or Saka will be back for this. So I imagine that's why that didn't take any precedence during the press conference. But he was asked about the Miles Lewis-Skelly situation, which I thought was quite interesting. And he was asked by Gail from Sky, did you get a chance to talk to him about what happened and how much do you have to work with him to make sure this is the next part of this process and progress? Because I know that you were quite protective over him there. And Arteta said, yeah, I think it was quite clear that we had a liability there with the yellow card and the next action. So it wasn't a moment to take any risk and learn from the experience managing the game for so long, especially with how important this competition is. So yeah, a lesson to learn from him. For sure, we will support and help him. But yeah, the line is really thin in the sport, and he needs to understand that. He admitted to having kind of a sit-down chat with Miles and kind of a conversation. He said, I know his reaction is like that. He's a perfectionist. He's got a great environment around him. They are here to learn as well. I think there was a question of as well from James McNicholas from The Athletic and from, of course, the Arscast. Let me find it. It's just further down here. And James said, just on Miles, is it a difficult challenge to strike the right balance with him? Because physicality, riding the challenges, winning the duels is such a fundamental part of who he is on the pitch. How do you control that without taking it away from his game? Which I thought was a really good question. And Arteta said, I think dominating the situation, that's it. Control the situation. You need to dominate. What space are you defending? What is the level of exposure that you have? Is the opponent facing you or not facing you? So what is the probability to win the ball? And when you have to commit to certain duels, and then you have to apply all defensive principles that are very clear to most of the time, have the best possibility to win the ball and don't get exposed. If you don't do that at that level, big problem. So it was an interesting answer. I don't think necessarily got the answer that we wanted, but it was a good question worth asking. And that lent into kind of this discussion around Ethan and Miles potentially getting a call up to Thomas Tuchel's first England squad. And Arteta said, I have no idea. Obviously, what I've read and hear about the noise that is around it. So it's Thomas who will take that decision with the coaches and will support it. Knowing Thomas and the coaching staff and the environment that they have created on the England campus, it will be an incredible experience for them if that's the case, whenever that is. That's not my decision. That will be their decision. How we manage them here is ours. It's in our own control. Down there, we'll leave it to the coaches and the people that are super experienced, much more experienced than me. And if both get called up to the England squad, I know we have these kind of feelings about overplaying players and Saka playing so much football. It's a massive, massive honour for them, a massive, massive achievement for them if either one or both get called up. And I do think that, yes, I'm concerned about fatigue and volume of games, but I do think there is an experience for these young players in being in the England. I don't think they're going to play that much. Young players, and they get called up, they rarely do get a lot of minutes, if any, in their first kind of call up. But I remember Nketiah got his call up for the first time. I don't think he played until the next round of games when he got called up for. I might be wrong. He definitely didn't play the first game. I think he might have come on the sub of the second game. But it's rare that they're going to get any minutes, but maybe because of injuries, they might get more than were expected to. But what an experience, and it's going to round them as players, it's going to mold them as players, improve them as players. So it's a good thing initially, but obviously it's that balance, I think, moving through their careers. These are players that have never played England under 21s football yet, and yet they may be going straight into the England setup. I think Kobbie Mainoo may have had something similar. So amazing. I don't know if Saka also went straight into the England senior setup before the 21s as well, but it's not unheard of. It does certainly happen. In terms of what I asked Arteta, I said that you mentioned on Tuesday night last week that we'd gone from a situation of 0 goals in 2 games to 7 goals in 1 game, and that being the beauty of football. I said that you've had a few more days now to reflect on that. Do you have any more insights in how we went from 0 goals to 7 goals in just 1 game? And he said they would have scored. They would have scored. We were in total control of the game in one action. They could have scored. They had the big chance with Saibari and they hit the crossbar. That could have changed the game, and if Miles had got sent off, it would have been a different game. So that's why you have to really understand the context of the game and how it happened. We were super effective in the final set in the box, and that's a massive strength, especially in the Champions League, and that's why we won the game without margin. That's clear. And he's right. It's important to take on the context. It's not like, oh, we scored 7 goals, we're great, blah, blah, blah. Arsenal could have been in a very different situation, and he's right to point that out. If Saibari had have scored the goal that, in my opinion, is an absolute sitter, I know Gabriel does well to get a block in, but still, I think he has to score that chance. I think Perisic also has to score the follow-up chance. And then, of course, if Miles gets sent off, it's a different game. Yes, you're leading by that point, but it could change the dynamic. Partey gives away a penalty. If PSV come out in the second half, score early, it's 3-2, different game. And so he's right to point out those elements that are different. But ultimately, Arsenal were ruthless. They were clinical, and when the moments that mattered, they got the goals that they needed to score. And then on the intensity, I said about, that the Premier League has had so much pressure on it. Those games against West Ham, the game against Forest, it felt like the pressure was monumental, as it is at that top level. And I think that pressure paid, and that affected our game. The Champions League was a new competition that we hadn't played in a while. And it kind of, I think, released that pressure. And I said, a different competition, something new, release that pressure. Returning to the Premier League this weekend, can you utilize that freedom and enjoyment that we saw on Tuesday night and into the game on Sunday? And he says it goes through momentum. And again, what the game provides, because we've been really good in certain games, but the result wasn't coming fast enough. The things were coming in the right moment, at that right time, in the right way. And that's very helpful. So every game is different on that. And I think they need to use that energy from the Champions League. The fact that the league is unfortunately looking very bleak in terms of the title, but there is still a job to do. We certainly have to solidify that second place at the very minimum. I don't want to see Arsenal dropping out of second place at all, because it's important to continue that progression and stability of a club but looking for titles in the future. But yeah, that was key. Last thing I want to talk about from the press conference is Simon Collins' questions around Chido Obi Martin. He said, can I just ask you about Chido Obi Martin, who you could come up against on Sunday? What were your emotions in the summer when he left? Obviously, he was a player that you had his young talent, and there was a lot of talent there. And Arteta says, I wasn't too involved in that decision. Obviously, when a player decides that the best pathway for him is to leave, there's not much you can do. Very unfortunate, because we want to keep our players from the academy and to be very successful with the first team. But in that case, and with Aiden Heaven, we weren't able to do that. Simon said there was a sort of feeling at the time, I think, among some fans that young players maybe didn't have a pathway. Do you think that now, this season, with Ethan and Miles, that sort of perception has gone, and that there is proof that if you're a young player and you've got the talent, you can play? And he says, I don't know whether the perception is out. Internally, not. And the reality is very different, because those players are always with us. I mean, I guarantee you, if there is a player that can help and impact the first team, he's going to be with us. Now, I think that's fair. And I think this season we have been transformed in how our young players have been given chances. Ethan and Miles are amazing. And Arteta has, to be fair to him, even before the injuries, was bringing these players on in key moments before he had to. Yes, the Odegaard situation, I think, could have seen Nwaneri come in earlier, but I think we've benefited by gradually integrating him. And then when he's been called upon now, it's been very beneficial for us. Miles Lewis-Skelly was being picked while he had other options like Kivior and Zinchenko, who could have played at left back. And Lewis-Skelly was picked regardless of that. So he is right. When he feels a player is good enough, they will get an opportunity. It's just waiting for those players to get those opportunities. And we've given debuts to Jack Porter and Tommy Setford and Ismail Kabir and Maldini Kukuri, Nathan Butler-Oyedeji. We've given debuts to a lot of young players. Aidan Heaven, before he left, got a debut against Preston in the Cup. Josh Nichols has played, I think, on a couple of occasions. So these players have been getting minutes. These players have been getting opportunities. So it's been much, much better this season. And those players, Aidan Heaven and Chido Martin, left, yes, because they felt like they could get more minutes, but primarily the money, we understand, was just far greater than what Arsenal are ultimately offering. And I personally think, in my honest opinion, that played a big, and probably the most primary part of, what we ended up seeing. Right, that's quite a long part one. So let's go to part two, tackle some of your questions and more. And I want to mention Ruben Amorim's comments as well, because it sparked quite a big debate yesterday, which I did see right after this. Okay, this is part two of the show where we jump into the chat box and tackle some of your questions and more. If you'd like to have an opportunity to discuss anything that we discussed today, or maybe some other things as well, now is the time to do that. And I want to kick off part two, obviously, by saying thank you so much always for listening. Really appreciate you being here. If you could drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you're new around here, has notifications turned on so you never miss a show. That would be incredibly appreciated. So now is indeed the time to do that. Thank you so much for your kind words, as always. Yeah, this Amorim stuff. So the quotes from Amorim are that he says, "I will not have the time that Arteta had. I feel that. It's a different club. So we just need to survive the players on Sunday and me during these games. I think it's a different club." This has sparked quite the discussion around expectation, around caliber, around what is thought about Manchester United and what's thought about Arsenal. And I've seen a number of people with the point of view, and I quote tweeted one, says, "Every manager of top clubs know this. No one is going to give you 6 years to win nothing except Arsenal and Spurs." Now, this comes from a random Arsenal account who doesn't know their history, because obviously Arsenal have won a trophy in the last 6 years. But this is the common consensus among a lot of supporters, maybe not a lot, but certainly a vocal a number online, is that if Amorim had done the job that Arteta has done at Arsenal, he would have gone by now. Or at Chelsea, if Arteta had done the job he's done at Arsenal, he would have gone by now. I think that's bollocks, personally. I think that's utter crap. I think that is such a horrendous understanding of everything that's happened at Arsenal. If, let's hypothetically say, Ruben Amorim takes a Manchester United team that have not competed for the Premier League title since Sir Alex Ferguson, right? Let's say he takes that team and wins the FA Cup with them this season. Can't, because they're out. But say he won the FA Cup with them this season, right? Next season, he takes them back into the Champions League, back into the top four. Or at the very least, top six, because they're 14th right now, I think, in the table, back into European football next season. And the season after that, he takes them back into the Champions League and goes beyond just that, but actually takes them towards a title that they miss out on. The season after that, he establishes Manchester United in the title race again after however many, a decade plus that it has been. And they just miss out to, say, Manchester City. And then the next season, again, challenge for the title, but has one of the worst injury records of any club that has ever existed in the Premier League. And again, they fall short of that title. They don't pick up those trophies, as Arteta hasn't picked up. I'm sorry, but they're not sacking him. They're not getting rid of him. They're just not. And what I hate about these comments from Amorim is they're arrogant, they're presumptuous, they're hubristic, and they're so hollow because he's done jack at Manchester United so far. He's done nothing. He hasn't changed anything. He hasn't come in and adapted. He's come into Manchester United and he's implemented his philosophy, his system, and it's failing. Now, when Arteta came into Arsenal, he didn't do that. When Arteta came into Arsenal, his system that we see today, his philosophy. I remember in the first year that Arteta was here, a lot of our conversations, a lot of our concerns were, I don't see a style of play. I don't know what Arteta's trying to do. I don't know what Arteta's trying to utilize whatsoever at all with this team. I can't see a philosophy. I can't see an intention. But what Arteta did do right at the beginning was switch to a back three, ironically, like Ruben Amorim has done, but that wasn't his style. And he went to a back three to try and stabilize things, stabilize Arsenal defensively before, of course, building and building, putting brick by brick by brick by brick, and gradually building up this philosophy, changing the formation, changing the structure, changing the players, overhauling basically the entire squad bar Saliba, Martinelli, and Saka, and ultimately grew Arsenal into the side that they are now. Amorim has not done that. Amorim has got his philosophy, his style, his structure, and he has implemented that regardless of the players available to him. He has not adapted to Manchester United, and as a result of not adapting, is week after week after week being found out and exposed, and Man United are getting worse. They are worse than what they were when Ten Hag was there. They are more beatable than when Ten Hag was there. They are less threatening than when Ten Hag was there. And Ten Hag was not having a great time. Picked up a couple of trophies, to be fair to the guy, but was not what you would describe as somebody that you would swap their tenure with what we've experienced at Arsenal competing at the top. So when you're looking at those situations, for anyone to say that, for Amorim to say that he will not get the time at Man United that Arteta has had at Arsenal because we are different clubs, is such an arrogant statement, an incredibly arrogant statement for somebody who has achieved nothing, even in the short term, and could yet be eliminated from the Europa League by Real Sociedad, could yet, of course, finish well inside the bottom half of the table, which Arteta has never, ever done, even though he joined at a later point in the season than what Amorim did at Manchester United, I believe. It's just nuts to me that those comments were made, and that some Arsenal fans are sitting around and agreeing with this hilarity that is that viewpoint. So I just wanted to rant on that for a second and get kind of my thoughts out on that, because I think it's so incredibly arrogant from him. I sincerely hope it blows up in his face, and I'd put a fairly large chunk of money on expecting it to at the moment as well. Right, let's scroll up and tackle some of the comments and questions from some of the other things that we've talked about today. Let's go to Shane says, in fairness to Newcastle, why would they sell Isak for any less than they spent £70 million? Exactly, that's a completely fair point. I'm a Gooner says, Tom, I found it strange how pundits like Lineker, Shearer and Richard spent 10 seconds on the result. The rest, how lucky we were with Miles Lewis Skelly. That's just the media narrative of Arsenal, isn't it? You shouldn't be surprised by that or find it strange. That's just the way it goes. John says, I think when teams play the low block without any real option as a striker, I think we struggle. When teams like PSV play more openly, football, it suits us. And that's why I think there's an interesting dynamic between Atletico Madrid and Real Madrid, is that whoever Arsenal get, there's benefits to both. If we get Atletico, you are getting effectively a team that you would consider a more favourable tie on paper, is what you're getting with Atletico. If you get Real Madrid, you're getting a less favourable tie, but maybe you're getting stylistically a team that would lean into Arsenal's strengths. You know, we're good defensively, we're good in transition, we can really punish teams that are a lot more open. So I'm kind of looking at it like that. But I think there are benefits to whoever we face in the Champions League quarterfinals, more likely when we get there. So that's kind of how I'm feeling on that. Abdul says, are you going to win the Premier League and the Champions League this season? I highly doubt we'll win both. I highly doubt we'll win one. And it says, are you going to the Man United game tomorrow? Yes, I am, Abdul. I will be there. Rahul says, Tom, do you think if we go to a project striker like a Sesko instead of a world-class player like an Isak, we should sign a world-class wide player like a Rodrigo or a Wirtz instead of a project signing? I think it's a really good point, Rahul. I think that if Arsenal move for a Sesko, they're more inclined to add someone of a more finished product in those wide areas, or somebody that's obviously could still be quite young, but is producing a hell of a level, like a Barcola. Like Barcola stands out for me as my dream wide player at the moment, beyond anybody else, beyond Williams, beyond Eze, beyond Rodrigo, beyond Wirtz. Rodrigo is a really good option. I think Rodrigo would be a really good piece of business by Arsenal, but again, plays more on the right, and that might concern me about Saka and Winery's kind of the area of that fit part of the field and how that would affect things. I think we're more in need of a left-sided player if one of those two, Trossard and Martinelli, of course, goes, because I don't see us signing a top left winger if they both end up staying. Isak says, could we see Dalman get his first team debut next season? I think so. I think I'm almost certain that will probably happen. Hitchhiker's Guide to Becoming a Therapist says, Tom, other than the obvious striker, what type of player do we need to sign in the summer, especially on the left, mid, and wing? I've talked about, I think, that question before about a young project striker or a more top winger. That's the type that I go for. So a Barcola would be a dream, but Williams would be an interesting addition. He's not going to get you like 20 plus goals a season, but he's going to be very creative for you, and is certainly one of Europe's most appreciated wide players right now. Semenyo is another that is really liked also and has that Premier League experience. And then, of course, you want that DM, and I think that Zubimendi makes a lot of sense. That Joshua Kimmich link, it seems that I think Arsenal's name in the end may have been used a bit to help with the contract talks with Bayern, because it seems like he's staying there. But I thought Kimmich would have been a very good foil to Zubimendi for next season. But another good signing there, and I think ultimately we need kind of a right-sided defender as well to give us more depth and cover, especially with Tomiyasu's injury situation. And then I think we need a backup goalkeeper, obviously. Jean Garcia would be a great addition to the squad. Mehdi says, do you agree that Arteta adjusted his tactics at the start to earn himself time to adapt the team to the tactics that he wanted to use, unlike Amorim, who just uses the only tactics he knows? I mean, yeah, I think I rounded that out, didn't I, Mehdi? I think that's probably what I explained in that monologue a second ago. Soup says Fergie almost got United relegated. It took him 5 years to win a trophy at United. I know it's different times, but the likes of Chelsea and City are different to us and United, whether they like it or not. What I would say is that Chelsea, I think that if Enzo Maresca, if Pochettino had got Chelsea, say, into the Champions League places this season, I think he would still be here. And I think the difference between Pochettino and Arteta and the time difference is the amount of money that was, of course, spent. The money difference with Poch and now Maresca is like, it's so much bigger than what Arteta's had. Like, so much more money has been spent in a far shorter space of time. And that does change things in context. Man United have also spent a lot, particularly on wages, and you're looking at their losses year after year after year. But I think the money side of Chelsea changes things a bit more. It's nothing to do with kind of expectations of the club or like the size of the club. It's more for me the money investment levels, and you're obviously, if you're spending a borderline financial regulation breaking amount of money, it does obviously generate a greater level of need to win now rather than a longer term feel about things. Clive says there was a rumor that we went for Rodrigo in January. He does prefer the left, but can't get a game there. He is my choice over Williams and Barcola. As I said, I think it'd be a really good addition. Barcola for me is just pure football. I just think he's a left-sided Bukayo Saka, really, and I'd love to see two Bukayo Sakas in the team. I think Barcola would be great. His speed is astonishing. Really would like to see Barcola. How old is Rodrigo now? He's 24, so he's not exactly old, is he? Barcola is 22. Either would be great. Either would be really, 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 really great to see. And Rodrigo is right-footed, scored a great left-footed goal yesterday, so he's very two-footed also. Oliver says, Steve, look at the team. The Slot and Conte won, though. You cannot compare us with them. What's that? Where's Steve's comment? Steve. I can't see what Steve. Slot and Conte won the Premier League in 9 months without spending a penny. I mean, yeah, Steve, I'd just look at the teams. It's as simple as that, really. It's very different. You look at the team that Slot's inherited compared to the team that Arteta's inherited. And also the luck, of course, that Slot's had this season with his title challenges being, so hamstrung, where Liverpool haven't. It's the stars have aligned for Slot this season. There's no other way. It's credit to him still. He's done a really good job, but the stars have aligned there. And the time it's taken to win those things. Liverpool were competing for the title last season. They were competing for the title the season before that. They won the title the season before that. And when Liverpool had the injuries that we had, they finished fifth, not second, fifth in the league, and they went out of all the cups in the first couple of rounds. So yeah, let's not just remove all context. But I think the biggest problem that I like a lot of the kind of craziest football views are these days is that is ultimately that people just think it's a binary thing is football, and it's just a trophy success. Everything else, nah. And that's because they think in 30 years' time, if you look back, you're only going to remember the season you won thing. And I get that, but we're not 30 years in the future. We are now, and where Arsenal are obviously is in a very healthy position, a very competitive position. And when we have our players available and aren't losing 4 of our starting 6 forwards, we are going to be more and can be way more competitive. And we would have been more competitive as well. Perry says, shouldn't we aim to sign 2 strikers to have differential impact, assuming Gabriel Jesus stays injured and leaves, or Havertz is the backup striker? I think 2 forwards, I wouldn't necessarily say specifically strikers, but I think 2 forwards are definitely a necessity for Arsenal during this window. I want to see Arsenal go for 2 forwards during this window. Forder on Football says, rank these left wingers in order: Nico, Semenyo, Barcola, Gordon, Leao. I would go Barcola 1, Gordon 2, Nico 3, Semenyo 4, Leao 5. I really don't rate Rafael Leao. I think he blows hot and cold way too much. He's like so inconsistent. I just don't rate Leao. I know that might shock a few people that I'd rate Semenyo higher than him, but I just don't rate him. I really don't. He's got 6 goals, 6 assists for in 25 Serie A games for AC Milan this season. It just blows hot and cold. Whereas Semenyo this season has 7 goals and 4 assists in the Premier League for Bournemouth, rather than AC Milan in Serie A. So yeah, that would be my ranking of those 5. Phil says, Tom Ornstein also said Arsenal want to bring in the best young talent from around the country, but we have yet to really see it. Surely this has to be an important component of a self-sustaining club. Oh, yeah, without a doubt, and they are trying. But we need to see more action rather than words, and hopefully that happens, this summer. John says Liverpool have been lucky with injuries as we were last season. Unfortunately, last season Man City were just better. Unprecedented says Amorim actually spent more already than Arteta did in his first season with the Dogu signing, with the costs of the game against Fulham and also the amount that they spent last summer. Ronald says, would you keep Havertz long term if he is a backup on such high wages? I think it's about Havertz's presence within the squad overall, not just at centre forward, but in a number of positions. If we had a striker this season, I think that Ødegaard would have probably dropped to the bench at one point, and Havertz probably would have played behind the centre forward because of Ødegaard's form being so poor. So it's not just about centre forward for Havertz, it's about his presence across the team in multiple positions that is of great benefit to us. Also, he's an excellent addition for later on in games where you need to have somebody in the box, have that aerial threat and presence. He's a brilliant scorer of headed goals. So, I think it's really important to keep Havertz, even if we sign a centre forward. Jabu says, sorry, I joined late. Did you guys discuss Jonathan David on a free? I would take Jonathan David on a free in the summer. Only though if we were also signing that top centre forward. But I think he's a really good replacement for Gabriel Jesus. And more naturally, a centre forward than Gabriel Jesus is, even though he can play in other positions. But I think it would be a really good replacement for Jesus, Jonathan David, and of course it would be a free transfer. Adwan says, any chance of both Martinelli and Saka being fit for the next round of the Champions League? Certainly Martinelli's got a good chance of being fit for the Champions League. Saka, I don't know. I certainly the noises I get tell me that they're going to be very cautious with Saka. They don't want to take any risks. I tell you, it genuinely wouldn't surprise me if he didn't play again this season. It genuinely wouldn't be a surprise to me if we didn't see Saka play this season again, or at least maybe not until like the last couple of games when there's nothing to play for in the league because we've wrapped up second place. It would not, maybe for a Champions League final, of course, or maybe a semi-final at a push. I don't think they'd risk him even in a Champions League quarter-final against those teams. I don't think they'd want to rush him back. They want to be really careful. He suffered a major injury. A really, 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 really bad injury. Like we're talking about tendons and muscles and attachments and such bad scenarios where you need hamstring surgery, which is, it's so major. It's such a major thing. And you do not want to put yourself into a position where he gets back, is back earlier, but because he's not had the requisite recovery and he's not in the right stage and he gets thrown in too quickly, that we lose him for next season. And then next season's affected. Like that, next season is more important for Saka than this season. So Martinelli didn't have a procedure. It's not as a major hamstring issue. It's just about recovery and repair. But for Saka, I'm sorry, you do not rush those back. They can be career defining if you get them wrong. So yeah, no. I wouldn't. Even if we get Real Madrid at home in the quarterfinals of the Champions League, I would not rush him back because I think Martinelli is a really good addition to the team. If we get him back, you can play Trossard up top, you can play Winery up top, you can still play Marino up top if you wanted. If he hits some form there, you can play Calafiori up top. Please, I'd love to see it. But yeah, not sure. Alex says, instead of Semenyo, why is nobody talking about Justin Kluivert? Is that someone who you take if the possibility was available? If we got the marquee centre forward, then I'd be more open to it. But not if we're getting a project centre forward. I'd want somebody a lot more high profile than Justin Kluivert. But I think he's had a very, very good season for Bournemouth. John says, Tom, could you see Arsenal moving Miles Lewis-Skelly into midfield the way he plays? He could be a great marauding midfielder, breaking lines, creating chaos. I could see it, but I don't know if I'm convinced that will happen anymore. I really got the sense from Arteta's own words that he sees him as a left-back now. He certainly feels like Arsenal's starting left-back, even with Calafiori there, and even with his rashness that exists at the moment at such an early stage of his career. I do think that Miles Lewis-Skelly is, for my money, becoming a very, very, very good left-back. And I'm excited to see that without question, develop further. Uncharted Edition says Saka is a clever player. Even if he's not the same, he'll still be better than average. Sure, but I want him at his best. And I want him at his best for more games than not. So please be so much more cautious with him than anyone else. Let's scroll up in the chat a bit more. John says, if we bring two forwards, what happens to Jesus and Havertz? Are they on the bench? Yeah, they probably would be. Unprecedented says, Amarim. Oh, sorry, we've done that. Ronald says, would you keep Havertz long term if he's back up? We kind of did that. Alex, we've done that. Ty says, I can think of 9 first-team players I would sell this summer. How many can you think of, and who, and how much do you think that we'd get for them? I've done this before, obviously. Kivior, Zinchenko. Tomiyasu not going to be sold because he's injured. Nelson's probably not going to be sold. Jesus is probably not going to be sold because they're injured. They probably will miss the summer. You've got Jorginho leaving. You've got Partey leaving. You've got Fabio Vieira, Lokonga, Tavares all going to be sold. Trossard or Martinelli, one of those two could be sold. Who am I forgetting? Probably someone. But these aren't players that are going to get you huge sums, to be honest. So it's not like we're going to make huge money off these players either. Maximius says, Tom, do you have any update on Saliba's contract that could be a path breaker for retaining top players? No update at the moment. Those conversations are, very much in the works, but there's no update or breakthrough on that front for a number of players. There was real hope about Gabriel, and there still is really good hope about Gabriel's optimism about that, but not done yet. Ashley says, who is the secondary targets for those positions? Zubi and Garcia would take most of the budget. Will they? I don't know if they take most of the budget. They take a portion of the budget. I don't know if they take most of the budget. Still want a second midfielder, a forwards, striker, a defender. There would be secondary targets, of course, but it would depend maybe also on who's sold again as well. That could dictate a lot of what we do. Steve says, start accepting, boy. Steve's unable of having a respectful conversation with somebody who doesn't have the same opinion as him. Gooner Jonesy says, Kluivert has 12 goals and 2 hat-tricks. If I remember right, and one of those was a hat-trick of penalties. So overrated. I don't know if he's overrated. I think he's having a good season. But I do think that when it comes down to what he's done, yes, there's things in isolation that have been great. I just think there are players that I'd rather sign at the moment. Jacob says, why can't we sign an experienced striker for a year or two? This would have won us the title last year and this season. I guess because, Jacob, the question was always like, who in that summer window would it have been? I don't see that. I don't see that striker the last 2 windows that was there that I was like, yeah, obviously it's there. People will say Gyökeres last summer, but there's such a huge risk on that front with Gyökeres. There's still a risk now, with that Gyökeres. There's not a guarantee there that it would have won us the league. So I'm much more in favour of signing the right player, but I'm also in favour of signing a player in times of real need, where there was that in the summer, in January. Sorry, there was a real need in January, and they failed to deliver that. Suchi says, Tom, what do you think about Xavi Simons as a Wirtz alternative? Play the same position, out wide, links up with Sesko. RB are selling him in the summer. Depends on the price tag. I wouldn't go like 70 million big on him. I like him a lot, have liked him a lot for a while. Just not sure if I'd go that big. I'm not sure if he's enough of a natural goal scorer, Xavi Simons. I'm not sure he adds enough goals to this team. He's got 6 goals and 3 assists in 16 games this season, which is not a bad return at all. And he's been injured. 1, 2, 3, 4. He scored in 5 games out of 16 league games. I'm not sure there's enough goals there from Xavi Simons at the moment to justify a move, and obviously the injury is a concern. He had 8 last season. He's more of a creator, and for an attacking midfield option that can play in wide areas, I want more goals. I want more guarantees. That's my only issue with Simons right now as an option. Perez says, how is Barcola and PSG's situation? Is he starting games? He is starting, even though they've brought in Kvaratskhelia. Bradley Barcola has still managed to maintain a very good record. He's got 17 goals, 11 assists across all comps, 12 and 6 assists in 24. He's scoring at a rate of 1 in 2, and he's still starting plenty of games for PSG on the left. He also played a game on the right the other day and got a goal and an assist. Kvaratskhelia, for instance, has played 6 Liga games, scoring 1 goal and getting 2 assists. He has started some games, but they've been at centre forward or on the right. Some have been on the left, but he hasn't been able to break Barcola out of that side so far. Ishad says, don't want to be in a similar situation next year where we're all trying to replace Xhaka. Absolutely. John says there's quite a few players out of contract this summer who we could sign now, ready for the summer. Who would you want from that list? Contracts expiring, transfer market. Let's have a quick look at who we could sign. I'd take Mohamed Salah. I'd take Trent Alexander-Arnold. I'd take Kevin De Bruyne. There's a lot of good players. Van Dijk. Tyrick Mitchell's a good left-back option whose contract is at the moment. I don't know. Some of these might have options, to be fair, that haven't been activated yet. There's always that element. Ola Aina has had an excellent season, but he's 28 now. But I tell you what, Ola Aina could be a really decent acquisition for the right back depth role. Just as a depth option in defence, Ola Aina, I think, could be a really, really interesting choice. He's been brilliant for Forest this season, and he's 28. So on a free transfer, Ola Aina, I don't think is a bad option whatsoever to potentially consider. Alex Mere as a backup goalkeeper, maybe. Could be an option as well. Only 27 at Napoli right now. Someone called Sayad Kalasinac. Have you heard of him? He's out of contract at the end of this season as well. You'd be unsurprised perhaps to know. But yeah, I mean, there's not loads that are like jumping off the page necessarily. There's some interesting players, but some of them might have options in their current contracts. But yes, not really sure that I'm looking at any. Jonathan David, obviously, we've mentioned already, could be one. But I think Ola Aina stands out to me as a potential one that could be a really financially savvy acquisition at right or left back. Can play either side as well. Soup says, if we end up selling Saliba to Real Madrid, surely this is our Coutinho moment where we got a ridiculous transfer fee. For me, 100 million doesn't cut it. It's got to be closer to 200 million. The issue with that is obviously the length of contract that he has left. I don't think you're going to see a 200 million type deal because he only has 2 years left on his contract. Real Madrid could just wait, and they would wait, and we know they'd wait because they've done it with so many other players. So that's the issue with the level of money that you'd get for somebody like Saliba. If someone came in with 120 million pounds for Saliba in the next 2 windows, particularly 26, if you got 100 million plus bid for Saliba with 1 year left on his contract and he's shown no signs of signing it, I think you probably have to accept that. I think you probably do. Because I do think that Saliba is a amazing, world-class, in his own category of defender. But if there is one team or one manager that could effectively replace a defender, I trust it to be Arsenal right now. And I think there are players out there that you could look at and say, wow. Look at Dean Huijsen, for instance, at Bournemouth. He would be a perfect replacement for William Saliba. Like, if you were to have to sell Saliba, Huijsen would be a great shout, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly. He has been, I can't believe Bournemouth got him from Juve. I can't believe they got him. Obviously, it came with a release clause. I think it's a £50 million release clause. If you told me that in the summer that Saliba has refused a contract and Arsenal are selling him for £120 million, and as his replacement, Arsenal are signing Dean Huijsen, I would be like, well, that sucks. But at least we're getting a brilliant young Premier League ready top talent that could be another world-class defender. So that's kind of where I see the Saliba situation. You can't, even the trophy-winning sides, the title-winning sides have lost big players because they didn't stay. Liverpool are going to win the league this season, and they're going to lose Trent on a free, it looks like. They could yet lose Konate. They could yet lose Van Dijk. They could yet lose Salah. And they'll win the league. I've talked to a few Liverpool people. They think they'll keep 2 out of the 3 of Salah, Trent, and Van Dijk. They think two of them will sign contracts, and one will go, and that one will probably be Trent. But it's no guarantees that winning you trophies keeps you players. So all these people turning around saying, if we don't win trophies soon, Saliba's going to go. Well, Liverpool are going to win the league this season, it looks like, and Trent's still going to go. So that theory doesn't necessarily always land, does it? We have to maximise the money that we get for players, says Soup, and I absolutely agree with you. Ola says, we have cover for Saliba, 125 million, take the deal. You've got Ben White and Timber. You bring in, other defenders as well. I think Timber and Ben White are excellent. I think Timber's got the capacity to be world-class. I think Ben White, when fully fit, is world-class. I rate Ben White that highly. I think he is excellent. I think he's a brilliant footballer who has been the best right back in the league in the last 2 seasons. I think that he is astonishingly good and highly underrated as a player. but you have to still replace. You'd have to bring in somebody very talented or already very, very good if you were to lose William Saliba. John says sometimes players want to move. It doesn't matter what the club can do to retain the player. If they want another challenge, it's as simple as that. Remember, for the players, it's just a job. Moss says that he thinks that Timber will be better than Ben White, and that's a hell of a compliment to Timber, is what that is. That's not a slight on Ben White. That's a hell of a hell of a compliment. Yes, it says we can't replace Saliba. You can. You can replace anyone. They may not be as good. They may never be as good as the player that they've replaced, but you can replace players. You can move on. You can. You can. Man City have won titles without Aguero, without David Silva, without Vincent Kompany. They have replaced these behemoths of the game and gone on to win titles. It can happen. Real Madrid lost Cristiano Ronaldo and went on to win trophies. Barcelona lost Lionel Messi, the best player to ever exist and kick a ball. And yes, they've had their struggles, mainly because of financial troubles, but they've still won trophies after Messi left. So, yes, you can replace the irreplaceable players. It will be hard. It's not a guarantee that it's going to work. No player, and I'll finish on this point from John, no one player is bigger than the club. None. Zero. No manager is bigger than the player. No executive, no owner, no player is ever bigger than Arsenal. Arsenal is the be-all and end-all. If a player wants to go, then maximise their exit. Replace them, move on. I hope Saliba stays. I've still got hope that he might stay. I've still got hope he might sign a contract. He has got an attachment with Arsenal. He has got plenty of love for Arsenal. Real Madrid are very hard to say no to. Very, very hard to say no to. And when you do say no to them, you don't tend to see them come back. But who knows? Anyway, that's going to be the end of today's show. Thank you so much. I hope that you've appreciated the extra long show. Apologies again that there was no show yesterday. I hope you have a fantastic Saturday. Enjoy yourself. Stay safe. Stay well. Stay happy and respectful. And I'll see you for a pre-recorded show tomorrow because guess what? I'm going Manchester and I've got to go early. To be fair, maybe there will be a show. There might be a live show. There might be a pre-recorded show. There will be hopefully a show. So yes, but I am going to Manchester tomorrow. So we'll bear that in mind. Have a great day. And as always, up the Arsenal.